Welcome back to the show, everyone. How in the heck are you? Hey, Dina, how are you today?
I'm distracted. I'm like the crows are flying around and the branches are moving and yeah,
That's
not
that.
focused.
Well,
Surprise.
I
Oh,
was
look,
like,
there's another one.
and yeah, and I mean, Dina,
Yeah.
those, we look so put together when I edit this, but the things
Yeah,
that happen before, in between, and after are
before getting
really
in the chair. Yeah, yeah, like spilling a Diet Coke this morning and then
like needing
were
to
running
rush to
late.
my to
Yeah,
to
yeah,
yeah.
things happen. Yeah,
Things happen, but we're here to talk about
yeah,
unfinished business.
yeah. We sort of got on this topic of talking about closing loops, and one of our followers mentioned unfinished, or like if you have a conversation with someone, or more specifically, if you have like a disagreement or it's an emotional conversation, and then you can't finish it, or you can't get to the point where you feel like you're done or have resolution, and then you're left with that. This happens to me a lot at work,
Yeah.
not with my clients, not even so much with my students, but with like fellow people that I work with, faculty. If we have a
Yeah.
meeting or something and something emotional comes up and you can't, the meeting has to end and then you can't finish it, my mind will go, just like a good autistic brain does, 6 million ways from Sunday about it. Could be this, could be this, could be this, could be this. But more specifically, like trying to find a place of safety. Like I go to, was I wrong? Am I okay? Is this
Yes.
okay? Did I say something wrong? Did I do
Yes.
something wrong? And it's like, I think that's a trauma response from years and years of people
Yes.
looking at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, no, I have this thing,
Yes.
right? And then
Yeah.
worried about the rupture with that person. I can remember doing this a lot as a teenager, running through conversations in my head to try to soothe myself around. I don't think I did anything all that wrong, and especially
Yeah.
if I couldn't talk to them about it. But the fantasy is that, oh, this is it. This is the one brick pulled out that now it's over. We had this toy when I was a kid. It was like a plastic tube, and then you put a bunch of these long sticks through it all the way around, and they had marbles on top. Do you remember?
Oh
I think it
yeah.
was called Plunket or
Kerplunk.
something. Kerplunk, yeah.
Kerplunk.
And
Yeah.
so you'd pull, one person would pull a stick out, and the idea was to pull out a stick and have the least amount of marbles falling through.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what it feels like to me. Like if I pull this one out, do the marbles fall? If I pull this one out, do the marbles fall? Some of it for me, I'm sure it's a little different for everybody, but when there's an emotional conversation going on, I get a little bit of that alexithymia and I'm not super articulate. In fact, I just realized a couple weeks ago that I can actually be non-speaking temporarily. If I get upset enough, like in a meeting, I just sort of sit there. And I think it feels dissociative to me. It feels like a trauma response. Like nothing I'm going to say is going to come out the right way anyway. The person's mad at me. They're not going to understand. And then if that's left over, a lot of having to kind of close the loop by checking in with that person again. And 9 times out of 10, it's me apologizing. It might not even be my fault, but I just assume it is. I'm sorry if blah blah blah. And the more I learn about autism, the more I get kind of pissed off about that, because it's like, there are other people that do things wrong too. Why do I always assume it's
Yeah.
me? Right. But it also, in a trauma response, assuming it's you is a way of getting locus of control back to yourself. So, like, my head understands why I'm doing that, but it's such an awful feeling. You can't fall asleep and you're worried about it, and it keeps playing over and over in your head. I'll process things through with my wife. Like, do you think I was right in saying whatever? And that helps. But until it feels like it's exhaustively brainstormed and or checked out with the other person, because there's some people I work with where I can't get that closure,
Yeah.
because we're not the type of people that get that. It really feels awful for a while. And then I go into, well, I'm never trusting that person. I get black. I'm not a black and white thinker, but I'm like, well, forget it then. I'm never, ever,
Yeah.
ever
I'm
gonna work with that person.
yeah, I'm taking my toys and I'm
Yeah,
leaving.
yeah, I'm leaving.
do you Do you know what someone this is a young person, obviously, because I'm not a young person, but
Uh,
it's called a rage
oh, rage room. Yeah.
not
Yeah.
a
Oh,
rage
you,
room, but no, when you leave, it's like it's a it's
oh,
a, okay.
a
For all of
rage
you younger
ranch or,
people,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Like
it's
a,
a they rage and they leave.
oh, okay.
There is a newer term. When I say newer,
Okay.
probably in the last 20 years, whatever. I'm old. Okay. And if you're in our wonderful community and you know what I'm talking about, will you put it in the comments? Because how often you guys save us from ourselves, I cannot even how
Is
many
it rage?
times.
Is it rage quit?
Yes, it's a rage
Yes,
quit.
I just Googled it. Oh, that's
It's a
awesome.
rage quit.
Yeah, it's a rage quit.
It's a rage
Yeah.
quit, which I was like, "Oh, that's so great." But, that trauma response is an interesting one because it
Yeah.
is like that idea of like that fight, the fight freeze. That it's a
Yes.
stress
Yeah.
response. I find myself like I could never I'm awful with comebacks. I think about them
Yeah. Oh, I'm
days
terrible with,
later.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, I
Awful.
don't you wish you could get them in the moment? Some people are
Yeah.
so good at it. Yeah.
Oh, they're so
Yeah.
good at it. I'm never good at
Oh,
those.
yeah.
And then when I want to say something in the context of a meeting, I can feel my heart
Yes. Oh my
beat and
God.
rise and I start to get nervous even
Yep.
though I feel like I'm judicious with my
Yep.
contribution and I've been thoughtful, blah blah blah. But yeah,
Yep.
whenever something goes wrong, it's so interesting or it doesn't feel right. It's
Hmm.
like, what did I do? Did I do something? Was I unreasonable? Was I
Right.
right? These questions. And it's funny because if we were to flip the tables and our client were to say, and our clients do say this to us,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just the reality. It's like the
Right.
fact that you're even thinking about it means you're not a narcissist. Like they're like,
Oh,
maybe I'm
yeah.
narcissistic.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
No.
self absorbed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, the fact that you're even asking this question
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's
really
from
demonstrates, right?
an entire lifetime of being dismissed or someone not, and I do think women have this more than men because that's a tendency. I
Yeah.
think that if you're not, if you don't have various levels of privilege, it's assumed and you get that trauma, I think, because people are more likely to say, oh, it's that or whatever. I have seen, and I keep wanting to bring it up with the people I work with, and then I chicken out. I shouldn't say chicken out. It's more like I don't want to bring it up because it's going to be a can of worms, and then I'm going to be in this situation.
Yeah.
That I can tell that I'm treated differently now than before I came out as autistic. I can just tell that some of the frame of what people have for me is like, oh, it's because she's autistic. I can just feel that, right? And it sort of is this subtle sort of nudging out to the periphery. And I'm like, oh crap. I remember that happening like as a kid. The kids get to know you, you're the weird one. And then until high school, until I found my fellow weirdos, and then we all hung out together, which was great. It was this feeling of like, it's just a subtle sort of pushing out of you from a group or not listening to you. My wife and I talk continually. She has the same problem with who she works with, is this minimization and not being seen, right? So there's this juxtaposition between really wanting to be seen and then not wanting to be seen if there's conflict, because I just want to like blend in and disappear from that
Yeah.
kind of that trauma response. And then like up here, like you said, a therapist, if I was working with someone that was having this issue, we'd do this reality checking. And well,
Of
you check
course.
in with the person and they never say they're mad at you and you figure it out and everything's fine. Stay in the fight and try harder. And I'm like, it's just not that easy. It's just not that easy.
No.
How could I stay in the fight when I have the reaction you've had? Like I've gotten to the point where if I'm going to be on a Zoom meeting where we have these meetings at work, I make sure I'm not wearing anything that's super hot because I know if I get worked up, I'm going to have a hot flash and I'm going to want to rip my face off. So I go into it like the least amount of clothing as possible. I make sure the rooms, and I'm like, what the hell? Right when you said that, I hadn't even been aware that I was doing that. I'm like, I can get so worked up that I have that big vasovagal
Yeah.
bloom of blood, and then you get all hot, and oh, it's just awful. Yeah.
I will say from a contextual perspective that Dana often talks about the suffering of those meetings off air.
They just keep getting, they just feel worse and worse the more enlightened I am
Yeah.
about myself. ugh. And I used to
Yeah,
love
and
the fact you're
yeah.
like, "Oh, we're such a functional group." But are we really? Are we really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I mean,
Ugh.
I think when you this idea of like how difficult it is, especially and, you know, we talk like we said, we were talking about closing loops and we were talking in our other episode. This was more about tasks,
Yeah.
task completion,
Right.
which, you know, social media, like I turn off, you know, all my notifications. I
Mhm.
am very
Mhm.
sensitive to my inputs. I don't do social
Yep.
media.
Yep.
I turn off my notifications. I don't have the numbers on my email. I don't do
Yeah.
any of that
Right.
because
Right.
it's like I have to close
It's
it.
too
And then
much. Yeah.
yeah, it's just,
Right.
it's way
Right.
too much. Um, but this idea of not being able to close a loop
Mhm.
relationally,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
it's painful.
Because it involves this other person or this other system, and it's
Yeah.
not always possible to do that. Like, I think about relationally, like, my wife and I are really good about, but it took a lot of work to get there, being able to do that, where I can say, "I just need to talk about this," or she'll be, we use the word harping, but she'll be harping on something, or I'll be harping on something, and then there's a lull in the conversation, and then she'll say something like, "Okay, just one more, and then I'm going to stop." And then I know it's
Yeah.
like she just needs to do. I'm like, "I'm here. Go ahead, go for it. Throw the balls, hit as many spitballs against the walls you need to until you feel done." That's not something you get in everyday life in most parts of your life, right? Your spouse is probably the one you have that with the most if you've got a functional relationship there. But yeah, in work relationships or even some friendships where people don't have the bandwidth or whatever to deal with that. And it's work, right? So you're supposed to be working. You're not supposed to be getting into a bunch of personal crap,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yep.
theoretically, but that interdynamically, you're dealing with other humans, so that's going to be in the room regardless. And if you have a bump in the road or a relational sort of kerfuffle and you can't finish it, I've had days where I've spun on something. I've
Yeah.
learned over time that this is bad. I need to do something about this. And it usually involves just checking in with that person, saying, I'm spinning. I'll do it with the person who's my chair who's great about it. And I'll just like, can we talk? Get on the phone and I'll be like, so I'm now to the point where I'm pretty sure you're gonna fire me. Or in your mind, you're like, we need to get Dana the hell out of here. And he'll laugh because he does that too, but he understands it. And so I'd be like, "Oh my God, no!" But I know where you're going. It's fine. And then 3 days of spinning, all he has to do is give me a genuine, "It's fine," because I do believe him and I trust him. And I'm like, it's just gone, like in an instant.
Yeah.
And that's really telling that I can be that stuck on something and feel that freaked out and feel like the world's coming to an end. But then someone can say to me truly that I trust, say, "It's okay," and it just falls away. So that lets me know it really is about the undoneness, and it really
Yep.
is maybe a little bit about that trauma response. I've had other people that I don't trust say, "No, it's fine," and then you're like, oh,
Yep.
mark the time. You're so full of it. I know it's not real, right?
Yep.
Some
Yep.
folks you need to not have in your life. I have a friend of mine on TikTok who does a lot about her narcissistic mother and how she's had to sever ties because it was just that
Mhm.
constantly. And sometimes you have to do that. The harder piece, and that's a very hard process. I've had to do that in my past with certain people. It's extremely hard to get to that point. But if you're also talking about like a weekly having that happen all the time, and it's like in a work setting, in a way, it's sort of awful because you're at work and you're like, why is this happening? I'm supposed to be working, but it's that relational component, right? If you have someone that will hang in with you long enough to talk it through, that's what usually helps. If you have someone that you go to and you say, I'm feeling really jacked up about this, and they're like, oh, it's fine, don't worry, or they don't want to process it, that's not helpful. You need to
Mhm.
have someone you can trust enough to say, oh, I'm pretty sure now this is the end of my career and it's all over. And that's where my mind goes with it. And have someone not say to you, what the hell's wrong with you? Because that'd be terrible. More like, oh, I've been there. I get it. It's fine. Right.
Yeah.
If you had someone that further gaslighted you, these are situations that I work with clients of mine where the reality is someone in their life or someone they're working with does do that to them. and you're not going to change that person. Now what? How are you going to have a relational loop that you can't ever close? How do you learn to live with that? Right? And it usually is to me, it's a different internal process of me framing that person saying, okay, they're not going to change for whatever reason. My dad's one of those. He's not going to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I could continue to torque myself up for the rest of my life around that, when I was in therapy, or I could just come to terms with the fact that that's a limit. We're never going to go beyond it. And it's just the way it is. And that was a really long, involved process of just let it go. And still, I can still kind of get that little flicking. And then my wife's like, you're doing it again. It's your dad. I'm like, oh, frick, there it is again. So it really is about learning and paying attention to knowing that you are in that loop, and then figuring out strategies that you can do to not have that loop close. So I'll do journaling, I'll do thought bubbling, I'll talk with my wife, I'll purposefully let myself go through 5 different scenarios. If it was this, would it have felt better? If it was this, would it have felt better? And then if I can find one that I would have felt better, I'm like, oh, somehow it feels like it's a version of closing a loop, because it's an internal, trauma loop that's not closed. If I can get to a point where it can make sense to me, then I can let it go. And I feel almost immediate relief when I do. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. Now I get it. But I think it's prime territory for a neurodivergent mind that does that popcorn thinking, right? Because before you know it, you have 50 different trails to follow. And then that feels super overwhelming. How do I possibly explore all 50 of those? It's too hard to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really like the differentiation between the internal process. What is mine and where does this come from?
Yeah.
And because at the end of the day, it is about how we sit in ourselves or with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think relationally, because we can't control other people,
Right.
and that other people are unpredictable, not that they're all unpredictable, but they can be unpredictable.
Yeah.
But we can't control them. And so what do, right? You called out a few things. One, we radically accept,
Yeah. Yeah.
right, the limitations of the person we're in a relationship with.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to be negative. I just mean this is where they are, and it's their own process that we cannot own. And
it takes a while to get to that point. You have to work through some things to be able to get to that point, for sure.
Yeah. And that, like, where is the closing the loop coming from? Like, that's the piece that I think is so helpful here. And again, here we are splitting hairs as usual. And we're getting into the weeds and we're getting into the nuance, because the reality is that's where the juicy bits are. It's like, it's the nuance. And that's why Dana and I, like, you and I will never say this is what you do for everybody. We would never, ever say that, because, the other question that I ask myself, because what this also feels like is anxiety.
Oh, big time.
Right? Yeah. It's an intrusive thought.
Yeah.
It's like think about your most hated song and put that on repeat, which every time it repeats, it gets louder, right? Like, I feel like that's what an intrusive thought is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very difficult to control, and it brings distress, right?
Mm-hmm.
The question maybe to yourself, because is this helpful or hurtful to me?
Right.
This line of thinking, is this hurting me or helping me? For some people, going through the 5, and this is why, the smarter you are, the more ways you just know it can go bad. So, the smart person could come up with 55 ways it goes bad.
Right.
Me, with my very simple brain, comes up with 2. And, I can spend the bandwidth on looking at those 2 options.
Yeah.
My client that has like clocking at 160, there are 120 ways. Like, what do you do with that?
Right. So then you can take
being around you makes me anxious, right? I didn't even know that it could go badly that way. I don't know. Right.
Or you take the 120 ways and do a thematic analysis on them, so you can boil them down. Like, maybe it's a 60. I can find a theme in all of those. But absolutely, the reason I started to chuckle a little bit as you were talking is like having a song you hate on repeat. And
Yeah.
my wife and I were just talking last night about The Wizard of Oz
Mhm.
and how much because the new one's out, we haven't seen it.
Wicked.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and the parts that used to scare the crud out of us when we were little kids. And I said, all the songs in that I really like, but the one when the lion is doing I am the king of the forest, I used to have to leave the room. It was so ingratiating. So right when you were saying, thinking of a song that you can't, that came into my head, and it's really was helpful thought because I'm like, if I can remember that scene when I'm stuck in a thought loop again and say to myself, "Oh, this is my brain singing the song that the lion is singing that you
Right.
live like your skin can't handle.
Yeah.
How do I get out of that?" And it is
Yeah.
a bit of an obsessive sort of thing, and I think that's why you have to externalize somehow, whether it's talking to someone you trust about it, writing it out. I'll do the bubbling because it's faster. Well, I'll write a feeling in a bubble and then do the lines off of it like a Venn diagram to try to brainstorm what's going on. You have to kind of capture those obsessivenesses, um, because that's what gives you that sense of completion when you can't actually get the completion with that
Yep.
person, right?
Yep.
And that's the reality, like with my dad, because of all kinds of, and I'm not saying this in a necessarily a mean way. I think the point that drove home for me finally was when my therapist said, he grew up differently than you. He's this age, belongs to that cohort. He's had years of socialization to not do what you need. It's never going to happen. And then there was a lot of grieving up to that point. But when one day it finally hit me as, oh, so I'm sitting here banging my head against a wall, and now it's my problem. It's not actually his because I'm assuming it'll change, and it's never. And then it was sort of like, oh, now it's in my wheelhouse. Now I can choose to. That's what I think radical acceptance is about. It's not just like,
Yeah.
well, there's crap out there. You have to accept it. It's more like going through all these, the 120 possibilities and then getting to the point where you're like, I can choose to drop the rope, not tug harder. And
Yeah.
it's so hard when you're in that relational loop of
Mm.
anxiety, though, where you don't even realize you're in it. It just feels like the anxiety is so big. Yeah.
Yep. And that's why I like that cue for me, that bad song, that irritating song,
Oh,
like,
yeah. Yeah.
that the thought is causing distress. Like the
Yeah.
thought itself is causing distress.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, again, if Dana and I were on the other side of the couch, as therapists, what do? We talk about locus
Mhm.
of control. We,
Mhm.
we we
Mhm.
talk about bringing things back into an area of things that you can control, which
Yeah.
are your thoughts and
Right.
your actions and your
Yeah.
beliefs, and that those need, sometimes those need an adjustment. And when those need an adjustment and they're connected to obligation, cultural
Yeah.
values,
Right. Right.
upbringing, I mean,
Yeah.
that's why that's so messy and it's so difficult to untangle.
Yeah.
That when you cut those wires or you drop that rope, you inevitably touch other parts of yourself
Oh, yeah.
that
Yeah.
are so difficult to maybe let go of.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and I would even say that hopefully these are surrounding your more significant relationships.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
other thing that I say is if it's someone that you don't respect
Yeah.
or
They can't
trust,
get in there.
who
Yeah.
beeping cares about what they
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah.
That's an
Yeah.
opinion. And I know, and listen, that's difficult even for me. I don't
Yeah.
like, I have a difficult time with negative comments,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
uh, why?
Yeah.
I don't know this person from Jim. I don't know. I don't even know a Jim, I don't think. But you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know this person, but this idea that I could be wrong or
Right.
could be,
I was at fault or something is a
yeah,
horrible, yeah, but even then, if you
awful.
were at fault, that happens sometimes. How do you let
Yeah.
yourself, "Okay, I did that, I'm done with it, let's move on." Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Or how do you just exist with different opinions?
right.
Even when, those opinions are even when the other opinion in your mind is like, what in the world?
What
Like,
in the hell? Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
right. And that's when you're like, I really don't need to associate with you,
yeah,
actually,
yeah,
because
yeah,
fundamentally our values and like we are fundamentally different. Our value
Yeah,
system
yeah,
is
exactly.
fundamentally
Yeah,
different.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And then you have to kind of pull away or unhook in a way that you can do
Yep.
that. Thinking what some of what I've done at work. I mean, I work with a bunch of psychologists, so we tend to bring up people would bring up personal stuff, and I've
Mm.
gotten to the point with some people where I'm like, I don't want to be that vulnerable. It's work. I'm not bringing this stuff up with X, Y, and Z person because it feels too vulnerable. And I don't have to because we're working, right? I mean,
Yep.
what that reality for me was like, oh, I can choose to not bare my soul to certain people. And then I don't feel as vulnerable. And there is a loss in that because I don't feel as connected. I don't have that opportunity for that deeper connection. But like after a point, when you get hit in the face enough times, you just stop doing it. You just walk away. You have to. But lots of spinning anxiety up to that.
Lots of
Yeah.
anxiety,
Mhm.
so much, those open loops, we are, I mean, I will say, I think open loops do feel a lot like anxiety and
Yeah. Yeah.
can be anxiety provoking. And so how do you get control back of your
Yeah. Yeah.
thoughts and your
Yeah.
body? Because sometimes, I know for me, my thoughts roll first and then my body probably follows along.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
just kind of being drugged behind like a truck, and
Over
so
a gravel
but
road
over
for
gravel, right? No,
miles.
no, yeah, no. I totally think of like a farm, hoping
Right.
Superman will come save me.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Yeah,
whoops,
totally.
that's more of my fantasies. But
Yep, yep,
I mean, if Henry Cavill's there, I'm good. Chris Evans, it's fine.
yep.
So
Right.
there you have it.
Oh.
But I don't know if this is helpful for anybody, but man, I sure feel better.
Oh, I think a lot of people are gonna the whole unclosed relational loop thing, I think people will be like, "Oh, yeah, that's the thing." Yeah,
It's
especially
a
for
thing,
neurodivergents.
and
Yeah,
yeah, and feeling heard and validated, and and with other people who struggle,
yeah,
because you care.
yeah,
Part of it is we're anxious about things we deeply care about.
yeah,
But where does that come from, and how do you take care of yourself
yeah.
when that's happening?
That's right.
How do you
Yeah,
develop those strategies that work for you?
yeah, yeah,
Is
exactly.
really the question. All
Yep,
right, everyone. Well, at the end of the day, we always say be good to you. That's important. And we
yep.
will catch you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.